Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Explainer. I'm super excited to have you here today because we're going to decode a really highly testable piece of literature for your Class 10 exams. We're looking at A Shady Plot by Elsie Brown. Look, if you've been struggling to keep all the specific character motivations straight, or you're kind of fuzzy on the brilliant irony in this chapter, don't sweat it. We're going to break it all down step by step so you can walk into that exam room feeling absolutely confident.
Here's exactly what we're going to cover today. We'll start with the cause and effect plot arc, move into character analysis, and then tackle the humor, irony, and themes. After that, we'll decode the title significance, flag some really crucial exam traps you need to avoid, and then wrap the whole thing up with a rapid revision.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the cause and effect arc. So, to really master this story for your exams, you have to understand that it isn't just a random sequence of funny events. It's actually a cascading chain of consequences. It all kicks off when the publisher, Jenkins, demands another ghost story. Our main guy, John Hallock, gets a little too cocky about his abilities, but then bam, he hits terrible writer's block. And that directly leads to event number 3, Helen the ghost showing up just to announce a strike. But the real kicker? That happens on day 2, when John's wife, Lavinia, buys a Ouija board. That single purchase leads to the absolutely chaotic Ouija party conflict, which then forces the hilarious resolution on day 4, where John finally gets his story. Notice how John's initial overconfidence completely sets the stage for the entire conflict. Now, what's really fascinating here is our central ghost, Helen. Think about how she actually shows up. When John is sitting there waiting for inspiration, she materializes in sections. First an arm, then a stiff white shirtwaist, a plaid skirt, and finally her solid jaw and bone-rimmed spectacles. I mean, she is not your typical scary ethereal ghost. She's literally a striking union worker representing the Writer's Inspiration Bureau. She and her coworkers are just utterly exhausted from being constantly summoned by Ouija board fanatics all over the place, and she demands that John uses his influence to put a stop to it. And speaking of Ouija boards, let's talk about the ultimate catalyst here. Lavinia buys this board at a bargain sale, enthusiastically calling it the duckiest, darlingest thing. She is totally swept up in the latest fad. What examiners absolutely love to ask about here is the irony. See, Lavinia buys this specifically to help John write his historical novels. She thinks he can just chat with Napoleon or whoever. But ironically, her help is the exact thing that jeopardizes his writing, his marriage, and his sanity. So everything comes to a head right here at the Ouija board party. John is forced to be Miss Laura Hingle's partner, and what happens? The supernatural forces completely corner him. All 5 boards in the room start calling John's name and repeatedly spelling out the words traitor and Helen. Now, as you can imagine, this completely sparks Lavinia's intense jealousy. She immediately suspects her husband is having a very real affair with some woman named Helen.
This whole mess boils over the very next morning. Lavinia is threatening to leave him, go back to her grandmother's. She marches in with a suitcase, demanding to know exactly who he's hiding. John is in a total panic, desperately trying to hide the ghost by flapping his arms around because he's terrified Lavinia is going to faint from fright. But when Lavinia finally sees Helen, she doesn't swoon at all. She looks at this owl-eyed phantom in a plaid skirt, and she just smiles, realizing her jealousy was completely ridiculous. The conflict resolves not through some brave, heroic deed, but through the comical revelation that Helen is just an overworked ghost from New York. And the best part? The whole crazy ordeal leaves John with what he calls the bulliest plot for his next ghost story.
Let's shift gears now to Section 2, character traits and textual evidence. Remember, in your exams, simply stating a character trait won't get you far unless you anchor it to direct evidence from the text.
Take John Hallock, for example. He's clearly overconfident. He literally says, "I'd begun to get a bit cocky as to my ability." But he's also highly protective. We know this because he flaps his arms like a beginner learning to swim just to hide the ghost purely out of fear that Lavinia is too sensitive and might faint. On the flip side, we have Lavinia. She definitely loves novelty and thrills, which we see through her craze for fads and snagging that Ouija board on sale. But she's also deeply suspicious and jealous. She packs her suitcase with that lock that leered brassily and demands to uncover this Helen woman. This total contrast between John's internal panic and Lavinia's misguided suspicion is really the engine driving this whole story.
Next up, Section 3, humor, irony, and core themes. Elsie Brown doesn't use terror to drive this ghost story. She uses pure comedy. Think about it. Normally, we expect ghosts to be these ethereal, terrifying, moaning spirits. But the reality in the story? Helen is angular.
She wears a plaid skirt and a stiff shirtwaist. She used to be a magazine reader, and right now she's organizing a labor strike because the ghost community is overworked. This massive contrast between traditional horror tropes and Helen's really mundane, bureaucratic reality is where the central comedic irony of the story lives. I mean, she even mentions she gave up her previous form because reading terrible stories made her mistake purgatory for paradise. So how does this build our core themes?
Well, first, we have the clash of the supernatural versus the mundane, ghosts literally complaining about working hours. Second, we have marital dynamics and trust. The entire climax relies on Lavinia jumping to conclusions about John's faithfulness over a parlor game. And third, the beautiful irony of the Ouija board itself. It was bought to cure John's writer's block, right? But it actually causes his ghost to strike, which worsens his block, until the ensuing marital chaos finally hands him a brilliant plot. Getting a grasp on those themes prepares us perfectly for Section 4, decoding the title. Examiners love to ask what the title actually means. A shady plot is actually a really clever pun with a dual meaning. On a literal level, it refers to a storyline involving shades or ghosts, since John is quite literally trying to write a ghost story. But figuratively, the word shady means a situation of dubious character or questionable honesty, and that perfectly describes John's secretive, deceptive behavior as he frantically tries to hide Helen, which is exactly what leads Lavinia to believe he's having a shady affair.
Moving into Section 5, high-yield exam questions and common traps. Let's talk directly about your exam strategy for a second.
You are highly likely to get a question like, how does the author use the Ouija board to drive the plot? But more importantly, where do students typically lose their marks when answering questions on this chapter? Let's uncover the biggest traps.
If you can spot these a mile away, you are going to secure full marks. Trap number 1, confusing the ghost with the historical Helen of Troy from mythology. Remember, Lavinia makes this exact mistake in the story, but the ghost corrects her. She used to be Helen of Troy, New York. Huge difference. Trap number 2, misunderstanding the pun above board. When Lavinia accuses John of flirting, he says the affair was quite above board, meaning honest or legitimate. But he's literally talking about leaning over a Ouija board. It's a visual pun. And finally, trap number 3, ignoring the cook, Glodolia. So many students skip her, but her specific dialect adds authenticity to the text. And, crucially, her intense fear of hoodoos is what finally gives John the perfect excuse to chop up that troublesome Ouija board for kindling.
We are in the home stretch now. It's time for Section 6, our final rapid revision, to really lock in everything we've covered. Here are the 4 foundational pillars you need to remember. 1, John's initial cockiness is what causes his reliance on ghosts for his writing in the first place. 2, Lavinia's total obsession with the Ouija fad creates the central misunderstanding of the whole story. 3, the ghostly strike organized by Helen acts as the true comedic catalyst driving the plot. And 4, Helen's completely mundane, unscary appearance is what ultimately resolves the marital tension, proving John's innocence once and for all. And that brings us to our final thought for today. How does Elsie Brown use the supernatural not to scare us, but to expose our own very human flaws? Think about John's pride, Lavinia's quick jealousy, and the irony of our obsession with fads. Keep that analytical question in the back of your mind as you head into your exams. Thank you so much for hanging out with me to decode a shady plot, and keep up the focused learning. You're going to do great!